Now that we're ready to render our mesh from Mudbox, we need to create one more piece of geometry to capture the shadow of our model. So I'll go to Create Polygon Primitives and go to Plane, and I'll just make quite a large plane under my mesh, and then I will just go to the attribute editor for that, go to Polyplane 1, and just to help us out in a moment, I'm going to increase the subdivisions to maybe 10 or something like that. And then I'm going to resize my my plane so it's really quite big. In fact, I might go to scale and just type in 20, 20 and 20 in there, which when viewed from a low down angle like this may as well be the horizon line. If I start increasing it anywhere beyond that, it doesn't really make much of a difference. We now need to create a camera. So I'm going to go to Create, Cameras, Camera. I now need to look through that camera that just popped up in the middle of our grid. So we'll go to Panels, Perspective, Camera 1. And now we can move about our scene as normal. And at the bottom it now says that we're inside Camera 1. So if we're going to put a background behind our mesh, we need to orientate the camera so that it fits later on. So I'm going to bring the background image that we're going to use into Mesh. So I've downloaded from the internet and put into my source images folder in my Maya project this image of a desert or canyon or something, and I'm going to bring that into Maya now. So instead of applying this to a piece of geometry, I'm actually going to connect it directly to the camera. And to do that, as long as we're inside our camera, I can go to View, Image Plane, Import Image, and it should take you straight to your source images folder of your current project. I can scroll down and go to find the image I'm going to use. And that should bring an image up straight away in your camera view. What some of you may notice is that your mesh has now disappeared behind your image. If you zoom in far enough, you might just see it in a small gap between the camera and the image plane. So what we need to do is push this image plane away from the camera. And the attribute editor, if it's open, it should be showing our image plane here. So what we can do, we can scroll down and find under the placement section, we can just scroll down here. If you go to depth, by default it should be 100. I'm just going to put an extra 0 in there to make it 1000 and then hit enter. And now the image plane is really quite far away. So now I need to orientate this camera so that it looks like the horizon line of this ground plane does line up with the horizon line in the background photo. And to help me do that, I'm actually going to click on my ground plane and I'm going to make a new layer for it to go on. So I'll click on the ground plane so it's selected, and I will go to create a new layer and assign selected objects. I'll double click on it and name it ground plane and hit save. And I'll drag that just underneath there. And I'm now going to set that ground plane as T for template, which means we can't see it. But if you typed in some subdivisions for it, you should see like some kind of large grid going off into the distance, which may help. So I'm just going to orientate my camera so it looks like, that's obviously wrong. Something like that looks about right. While we're over here in our layers section, I'm going to select my image plane and assign that to a layer as well. You may just be able to see a green boundary, which is the image plane. If you can't see it, if you go and just click on your resolution gate, it should zoom out slightly, allowing you to see the green border of your image plane. If you just drag around that border to select it, you should see it now turn yellow. I'm now going to go and create another new layer and name this one image plane and save that, and which means I can turn it on and off whenever I like. I'm going to leave it on for a second, and I'm just going to orientate my geometry into an interesting position. So I'll maybe have it at an angle like this, and that will do. And now that I'm happy with the position of my camera, I'm going to keyframe it to this timeline here, so that if I ever move the camera, I can wiggle this timeline and it will snap back to position. So to keyframe my camera, just so to kind of so that Maya remembers the current angle of the camera, I'm just going to go click on my camera icon up here, just below where it says view, and this will select the current camera that we're looking through, and I'll now hit S on the keyboard. And wherever your time slider is, if you hit S, you'll see it create a little red line on there, and your camera attributes are now red, which means they are keyframed. So the benefit of this is I can move my camera around to anywhere I like, and then I can just wiggle my time slider here and it'll snap back to where it was at the correct angle. We're now ready to start rendering. You need to check that your computer has a mental ray enabled. To do that, just go to Window, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and if you scroll to the bottom of Plugin Manager, somewhere near the bottom, you're going to see Maya 2MR, M-A-Y-A-T-O-M-R, and then make sure that's got loaded and auto load next to it, and you can close that down. As long as you've done that, you should be able to go to your render settings, which is this icon up here, and go to render using mental ray instead of Maya software. After you've done that, go to Indirect Lighting, and here you'll see physical sun and sky. Go ahead and hit create on physical sun and sky, and close render settings for now. Somewhere in your scene, a direction line for the sun has just appeared. If you can't see it, hit 4 on the keyboard, so that you can see through your mesh. And near the middle of your grid, you should see, at the middle of your grid, you should see a bunch of red arrows. If you go ahead and click on those, I've clicked on them, resize them, and move them up somewhere above your object so that you can see it quite clearly. And I'll wiggle my time slider here so that the camera snaps back. You can then orientate these lines by hitting E and just choosing a direction that works best, or where you think the sun would be in this scene. And now you can go ahead and just do a test render to see how this looks. If you go up here with the clapperboard and hit render, you'll see that it's horribly overblown and bleached out and everything like that. So we've still got some things that we need to sort out. So there's going to be a few test renders that we're going to do as we gradually improve what we're looking at. And it's important to keep any previous images so that we can see the improvements. Every time we hit render, this will be replaced unless we hit this keep image button. This doesn't save it onto your computer, it just keeps it in your computer's memory, and you can drag through it by scrolling down here. So make sure you click on keep image. You can close your render view for now, and then we can see what settings we can change to improve that. So if you click on your sun direction shape in the sky, you should be able to scroll down. In fact, go to where it says physical sky, that's MIA physical sky tab, and you'll see the multiplier is currently set to 1. If you type in 0.1 and hit enter, let's have a look and see how that works. So I'm going to render the current frame again up here. Now it's not as bright, but it's horribly grayed out. So I'm going to save that image anyway, and there's still one more setting that we need to change. So I'll close down my render view, and I'm going to go and select the current camera that we're looking through. So I can go up here and click on the select camera. In fact, I'm even going to click on select the camera and the camera attributes as well, which is the second button along. And I'm going to scroll down in the camera attributes down here until we find a section called mental ray. Drop down in mental ray, and you're going to see just 3 fields here. One of them is called lens shader, and this is something that mental rays automatically set up. If you want to be clever, I don't want to be clever today, so I'm going to right click on lens shader and hit brake connection. Now let's have a look at what effect that's had on our render. So again, I'm going to render the current frame. Now this is much more like I had in mind. So now we can go ahead and improve the quality slightly, see what other settings we need to change, and then render off our vehicle.